Now today I will be covering one of the easiest storage mods to get into in just about any mod pack that you might encounter. And that mod is none other than Refined Storage. This modded tutorial is brought to you in dark mode. Now, first of all, I need to kind of explain what refined storage is sort of meant to do. It's meant to not only store items, but it can also store fluids. It is also meant to allow you to transport items from one location to another, and same with fluids. And it also has the ability to autocraft and process items. Now, typically, you will see a debate over Applied Energistics and Refined Storage, both of them being storage mods, and I have recently covered Applied Energistics. You can check out the links down in the description below. I'll have links to that video there. But the Refined Storage in itself is vastly different from Applied Energistics. It's, well, much simpler, but can do a lot of complex things. And today I'm going to do my best to try and explain those, starting from the creation of your first network all the way to autocrafting. Now, real quick, if you are enjoying this video and you enjoy videos just like these, be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already to let me know that you want to see more videos just like this one. Oh, and also if you have some awesome tips, be sure to let me know down in the comments below so that way you can help others in the community just like you. And if you're looking for more tips like these, be sure to join my Discord. All of that linked down in the description below. Now, starting from the beginning, typically to get started with this mod, you essentially need to gather up some string and you also need to find some slime. The reason for this is you are going to need to make processor bindings. Now, processor bindings are simply just slime and string, and this is going to allow you to make processors, which are going to be fundamental for crafting just about everything in this mod. Now, another place you're going to need to go is also the nether typically, and that's sort of the gate for this mod to get into it, is going to be the nether, because you are going to need to produce silicon, and silicon comes from nether quartz, just being smelted down. And that quartz also translates over into the quartz enriched iron, which is another fundamental item that you're going to have to craft to basically make everything from this mod. So now with the crafting recipes out of the way and a basic understanding of sort of the progression needed to even get into refined storage, we can now start to actually place blocks down and get into our first setup. And to do this, we are going to need a controller. This is the fundamental block that is going to control all of our systems and is basically going to provide power to everything. So in this case, I'm going to be utilizing a creative one, as the controller itself does require an external mod, some other mod that generates power to provide power to it, because refined storage does not in its own right have a way of generating power. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to be using a creative controller for this, but it works exactly the same. It has an interface and will display how much power everything is actively going to use. It also has redstone control, which is very important to note if you're trying to conserve power. All you have to do is place this into a redstone mode that is corresponding to what you're wanting to do, and you could place a pressure plate here to basically control this and turn it off or on. Basically, if you want to stand on a pressure plate and only have this turn on when you're standing here, you could do that with a pressure plate. And redstone control is going to play a very important role in this mod. There's a lot of things that do have redstone controls, and it is very important for logistical purposes. Now with the controller in place, we can actually start to make our first storage system. And one of the easiest ways to do this that doesn't actually require diamonds is to simply use a storage block. Now, a storage block works very much like a storage disk. These are going to store 1,000 items, whether that's 1,000 swords or 1,000 blocks of wood. It doesn't matter, 1,000 items regardless, which is fantastic for the refined storage mod. It makes understanding things a whole lot easier. And so we can simply place a block here, and we can place a grid down to be able to access the items that are going to be stored here. And the grid is very important. This allows us to place items inside of it that are then going to be stored over here into this block. But keep in mind, everything we add does have a power cost. This grid is now going to cost 2 FE per tick, or 2 power per tick, and this is also going to cost that. So as soon as you start expanding on your refined storage system, you're going to notice the power draw increasing. Now, this storage solution is nice, and while it is very cheap to set up, it's probably going to be something that you want to get away from as quick as possible. And so one of the next upgrades should possibly being the disk drive. That is, if you didn't just straight go for the disk drive. But the disk drive, like I said, costs another diamond components. And while you're doing that, you might as well also upgrade your regular grid, which looks like this and just allows you to pull items out and put items in. You probably want to upgrade to a crafting version. The crafting version is going to allow you to not only do the same things, pull items in and out, but you can also craft from it using JEI or whatever crafting manager you are using. And then once you have this set up, you can start to place your storage disk, which is just a slight upgrade to that storage block, but it works in the same way. But now that you have a disk drive, you can start to do some more complex things. You can place these disks in here, including fluid disks in here, and you now have a bunch of redstone control. You also have some blacklisting options, and you have some access information. You can make disks that only allow items to go in and it can't be actually extracted from. You also have controls to priority, and priority is a fundamental part of just about any storage mod, allowing you to say, make sure you only send items into this first and then send items elsewhere. If you want to do that, you just need to increase the priority in this case. So you just need to raise that number, and the higher the number, the higher the priority. And when I say that, to simplify it a little bit more, that means that if I placed in a piece of cobblestone in here or anything, and I have the priority set to 1, which is higher than default, it will always try to go into here first, and then any other thing we have connected, if this is full, it will then send elsewhere. And the same goes for a negative priority. It will basically do the opposite. So now if storing items is all you want to do, this is it. This is basically it. You just keep adding more disks and more disk drives, and that is essentially your storage system set up. Now, some things to note. You can actually connect this with cables instead. So if you're wanting to move this around your base and you want this all disconnected from each other, you can definitely do that using the refined storage cables. And now, while we're also on the topic of cables, we might as well talk about the wrench and how to cover and facade the cables, as those of you who like decorating will really enjoy this. So to be able to cover a cable, you can simply make a facade by using an iron nugget typically and just a block, and that is going to generate a facade. And this is going to allow us to cover these cables. And you'll see it covers like this and places a little blocker right here. And so if I was to place a cable on the side of this, notice this is also another way of separating the cables from one another. But that may not be something you want to do. You actually might want a pass-through. And so to do that, you would use a hollow cover, and that would allow the cable to pass through, just like you see here. So you can have yourself a facade on one side and have yourself a cable pass through on the other, which is fantastic. And now with the wrench, this is what this is basically used for. Outside of just rotating blocks, which the wrench can do, if you just right click on your cable that has a facade on it, it will then pop that facade right off, which is very nice. Now on the topic of decorating, we can also dye these screens and also the controllers. So if that's something you're wanting to do, you can also do that by simply right clicking on it with the corresponding dye. Let's also not forget another item that this mod adds that is definitely overlooked, and that is the portable grid. Now the portable grid essentially combines a grid, a fluid grid, and also a controller. And this does need to be powered, but you can hold it in your hand. And what this allows you to do is to take a disk and put it inside, and now you have access to a portable storage grid, which essentially acts like a backpack that can store as many items as the disk you insert into it can store. Now, speaking of other overlooked things, the actual item filter here is a really useful thing for filtering your refined storage grid. And this might seem a little odd, but what it does is it allows you to, for example, drag items in from just like vanilla Minecraft, and you can do a mod filter on this by placing the item in to the filter grid and an item here to display an icon. You can go ahead and filter all of the vanilla items out. So when you put this in, you're now going to get a tab up in the top. And when you click this, it's only going to display what you had set as your filter. So if you wanted to specifically filter out items and not the actual mod, you can do that as well. But it is a great way to filter out modded items specifically, so that way you don't have to constantly search for it every time you want to look for that mod. So now with the basics of storage and decoration out of the way, we can really start to talk about the more advanced parts, and that is getting items and fluids from one location to another, or just into our storage using refined storage. Now, this is going to involve our external storage from refined storage, our importer, an exporter, a constructor, and a deconstructor in this section. And for this, I would like to call this refined storage's IO. So one of the first ones I definitely want to cover is a way to extend storages outside of refined storage itself. And to do this, you will use an external storage. So if you had any sort of inventory, and that includes controllers for things like functional storage or storage drawers, you can attach yourself an external storage to that inventory to read its contents, and that is going to allow you to access them. So inside of here, I, for example, do not have a bunch of fish barrels. So let's go ahead and place down that external storage onto this barrel, and when I put fish barrels into here, I should now be able to see and access those fish barrels. And you can see I just pulled it out and placed it in. But if I place it back in, remember from earlier, notice how those did not go back into storage. That's because they actually went into this disk. So if I wanted to make sure this barrel filled up first, all I would have to do is make sure its priority is set higher. And so if I was to now take the fish barrels out, and if I was to place them in here, and then also pull them back out and place them back in, we're going to notice that they go in here every time. So that is a great demonstration of how that priority system works and how you might want to use the priority system, especially if you're connecting it to a drawer system. Now, next on the list is the importer. Now, something to note between the importer and the exporter. If you look at them closely, when they are laid down, you'll notice this looks very similar to a hopper. And so when connected, you'll notice that this is the top half of a hopper. So think of these as a hopper. An importer is always looking from the perspective of the network itself. So in that case, if you say, I want to import something, that means you want to import it into your network, not import it out of your network, import it into your network. It'll help you kind of keep track of what export and import means when you have context to where it's referring to. If you forget that, you can always look at this as it is basically a hopper shape. So with that in mind, if I was to place, for example, the importer on the side of this barrel, I can then start to place fish barrels into here, and we're going to notice those are disappearing. That's because this importer is now pulling items out of this barrel and importing them into our system, into our network. And inside the network, we can then see this is filling up. And we're going to notice that the number on this disk over here is also going up because that is where it's storing these items. Now, moving on to an exporter, this also looks just like a hopper, except the hopper is facing in to the barrel. And so this is going to export items out of our network. And to do this, it doesn't just start exporting items. You actually have to define what items you want to pull out of your system. And so you have a whole list here of slots to basically pull items out. For example, I want to pull fish barrels out. So I place them in, and if I have my fish barrels in here, we're going to notice they're going to start to dwindle, and they're making their way into this inventory. Now, this is very important later on, as we can also use the upgrade slots over here to determine and tell this to always export a certain auto-crafted item. Now, we'll come back to these things here in just a moment, but for right now, let's now talk about the constructor and the deconstructor. Both of these are going to work the way that you might think. So if we have ourselves a fish barrel that is placed right here, and I have a constructor, the constructor is going to do just what it sounds like. It's going to construct blocks using them from our system. And these are very easy to understand. If I just place a barrel in here, this is by default a whitelist mode, and I place the barrels in, it's then going to place that fish barrel out. And so you can see that that fish barrel has been placed, and whenever I break it, it is then going to place another one. Now, if I go ahead and over here use a deconstructor, what I can do is I can go ahead and take these fish barrels out, and I want to connect my cables in like this. Well, notice this is now just going to break. But over here, we do have a mode. We can change this to whitelist mode. And if we don't want this, for example, block to be broken right now, we don't have to have it broken until we put it in the filter. And now that it's in the filter, you can see it is breaking. And this can be very, very useful, as there's a bunch of upgrades, for example, that can do silk touch, There's also ones that can do fortune. So you can have fortune 3 inside of this deconstructor that is going to break the blocks or ore with fortune. And a great example of that is with our diamonds. So if I have some diamond ore, which I have right here, and I construct diamond ore, and I have this only break diamond ore, then if we go ahead and break this, we're going to notice with that fortune upgrade that we're going to start to see diamonds increasing in here. And this is a great solution for automatically ore processing things like diamond. Now that one feature alone is amazing and basically gives you possibilities for automating things like Botania and many other mods. So now that I've demonstrated and shown you how the importer and exporters work and the constructors and deconstructors, let's talk about a redstone component that is very important to this mod. And that is going to be the detector. So the way a detector works is it can read the inventory of your actual refined storage network. And so what you can do is you can have it emit redstone signals based off of those parameters. So if we have, let's say 64 stone in here, and I place the stone in, I can then have this set to, for example, 64. And it does nothing at first until we start changing the mode. So emit a signal when on the amount. So right now, on its current setting, I have it set to 64. This should turn on when I put the 64 stone in. And you can see right here it is. And if I grab a redstone component, we'll be able to see that it is emitting a strong redstone signal. Now, if I was to change this, for example, this is emit a signal when above the amount, we can see that at 64, if that is setting in there and there's 64 in here, it's not above the amount. So if I add some stone, just one stone over, then it should emit a redstone signal, just like you see. And then, of course, there is the emit signal when under the amount, which is very, very useful. And so if I pull out, for example, 32 out of here, there's no longer 64 in there, and this is now sending a redstone signal. So this is super useful, very, very useful for automating things and turning on your exporters and importers. And this will be especially useful whenever we get into autocrafting. Now, in line with I/O with refined storage, there is also interfaces. Now, interfaces are a little bit different than the exporter and importer. It's a block that acts like an importer, but you basically pipe items into it. So this can be piped into, for example, we can use a hopper and I can place stone in here, and that stone is going to go into this slot and it's going to be automatically imported into the system. Sort of like a way of dumping items in. But this can also take items and keep them in stock where you could pipe items out of this block. So by putting items in this filter on the export slot, it is going to fill this bar down here with items that are going to be pullable out of here. And so essentially these can be hoppered out. So if you take a look here, you'll notice that they can be hoppered in, and then they're basically being hoppered out of this slot right here. And if you have 30, it's always going to keep whatever amount you have specified in stock right here. And the same is true for the fluid interface. You can pump fluids in, and then you can also choose what fluids you want to be pullable, so something you can have piped out. Now, if using pipes, for example, to move items in and out isn't your thing and you want to do it by hand, well, you can utilize this, the storage monitor. So the storage monitor kind of works like a storage drawer in the fact that you can display particular items. For example, we have some stone and we also have some planks, and I can shift right click to access the inventory, and this will display how many of the items are actually in our storage. So you can see it will actually update that number and will show the block right here. But this also has some other functionality. If I go into survival, I can go ahead, and if I want to pull the whole stack out, I just need to left click. And then I can also right click to put it back in. And we should be able to pull one item out at a time. So we will pull one item out at a time. We would hold down shift and left click, and that lets us pull one at a time. So another nifty little way that you can interact with your refined storage system outside of just using exporters and importers. Now, before we jump into the meat and potatoes of autocrafting, let's actually take a little bit of a kind of a dive into wireless networking, where we can take a look at how we can access this storage wirelessly. And when I say wirelessly, I mean the ability to not need to walk up to this grid to access it. We can actually access it from the distances around our base without the need to constantly go back to this main system. Now, going wireless with refined storage is probably one of the easiest things you can do. You just need a wireless transmitter and you put that on your storage. You can attach it to a cable just so long as it's connected to the power, and you can see it right here. This has an inventory inside of it, and we can put range upgrades inside to increase the amount that it can go, up to 48 blocks by default. Now, there are mods that do add unlimited range upgrades on this, but those are, of course, add-ons. And we're going to talk about more add-ons here in a moment. But by default, to be able to link your wireless grids, you're going to need some power to give them, so a way to charge them separately through some other mod, and you're going to need to basically hold down shift and right click the controller to link them. This is going to link them to your network, and then you're able to open them up. But notice, this is the grid. This is all you get with the base mod. So you end up getting a wireless grid, you get a fluid grid, and you also get yourself a wireless crafting monitor. Once we get into Autocrafting, this will make more sense. But by default, this is all you have. You have these 3 grids, and there should be a way for you to set a hotkey to them to be able to open them. You can see they can actually go into a ton of different slots. So that is just the default grids that you can access. But for example, there is this add-on mod right here, which is the wireless crafting grid. And this is from the refined storage add-on mod. And so what you're able to do is link this, and this one, for example, would give you a crafting grid, but it is not a default part of refined storage on its own. Just something to keep in mind. But let's talk now about the more advanced wireless part of refined storage. And for this, it is going to require a network receiver and a network transmitter. Now, the network receiver and transmitter are going to rely on a network card. And you can kind of look at it this way. A receiver receives information and a transmitter sends information. So what we want is our transmitter to be connected to our storage in some way. Now, this is going to have an inventory. And then what we will do is place a receiver somewhere else. And then we need to use our network card to shift right click on it to link it. And it will have that location stored to it. You put it in here, and now our storage system is actually accessible over here on its own and also carries the power. So you can actually do this cross-dimensionally, and that is one of the easiest, in my opinion, one of the easiest wireless cross-dimensional storage networks that you have access to. This has got to be one of the easiest mods I've ever used for doing such a task. Now, another interesting use in the base mod, if you wanted to carry your range further than 48 blocks, what you would do is you would add a network receiver, and then you would just place another wireless on here, and that would extend your range even further. But like I said, that's just assuming that you don't have any add-on mods. So with the wireless out of the way, it's now time to talk about Autocrafting and how we can do it super easy within refined storage. Now, to start Autocrafting, you simply need 2 things. You need yourself a pattern grid to make the patterns that are going to be crafted, and then you need yourself a crafter. And that is basically it. So you're going to need to basically put your patterns in this slot, and you can see right here we have processing as an option and we have exact. By default, we're not going to bother with the processing just yet, but let's just say we wanted to be able to craft a bunch of crafting tables. So to be able to do this, we would basically make a crafting table pattern. And let's say we wanted our logs to be turned directly into planks. Well, we can do that as well. And we can generate a pattern. And so if I go ahead and I place them inside this crafter will now craft these items whenever we request them. So let's just go ahead and pull our planks out for right now, and let's just assume that we don't have any planks. So what we need to do is craft up some crafting tables. So I'm going to craft 10 of them. And so when I do this, I'm going to hit start, and now we can actually start this autocraft, and we should start to see these crafting tables start to build up. Now, this feature alone is amazing, but it is not limited to this because there's a lot of other functionality that you can actually use without just manually tapping the request craft. So let's just, for example, try to craft a crafting blueprint. So for this craft, we're going to need a painting and a crafting table. Now, we do not have any crafting tables in storage, so what I'm going to do is click to craft this blueprint. And if I wanted to craft one, and I didn't want to have to go through the process of clicking the auto start for the crafting table process, I can just hold down Control and I should be able to click the plus button here. You can see it highlighted in blue, and this will go, okay, I don't have it in storage, so I need to craft it. And because I have it craftable, I can go ahead and hit start, and that is then going to craft the required ingredient for this craft, allowing me to make the crafting blueprint. Now, some things to note about the crafter itself. Over here, we actually have a couple of different kind of upgrades. We have a stack upgrade, which is a fantastic upgrade that allows our exporters to send stacks at a time. But we also have speed upgrades, and speed upgrades allow us to speed up those pipes as well. And for example, speed up our crafting table. And you can see using the jade here that our current crafting speed up at the very top is at ×1. But if I put these in here, it is now going to be 5 times faster than its initial crafting speed, in which in the base mod is as fast as this crafter can go. Now, I did gloss over this processing right here. Now, this is another type of craft that you can do and utilize these crafters for. And this is going to be for anything that needs to be sent into a machine to be processed outside of normal crafting. So a great example of that is anything that needs to be smelted. So to be able to get this to work, we are going to need to put a crafter on top. And this is where this wrench comes to play. We can actually rotate this until it's facing down because this is the side that it's going to output to. And then we are also going to want to make sure we get the item that we request the craft for. We need to make sure that that item makes its way back into the system. So for that, we're going to need an importer down on the bottom of our furnace. And then, well, with furnaces, we probably also want to provide it with some coal. And so we can just simply add an exporter on the side and we can say, add some coal over here. Why don't you? So I'm going to grab some coal and I should be able to simply put that in the system, and that's going to automatically start feeding this with some coal. And so now with everything connected up, we can, for example, process up some sand and turn it into glass. So to be able to do this, one of the best ways is we will turn on processing mode, take a look at how it's crafted, find the smelting recipe, and then find the sand smelting recipe, and then place it in. And this is going to automatically set it up so that way it sends 1 sand and it's looking to get back 1 glass. And we'll make this pattern. So this is the processing pattern. And if we put that in here, this crafter is going to work a little bit different. Instead of just crafting the items in here, it's then going to try to send the items into an inventory. And this can send to a chest and it can send into the furnace, for example. Now, as soon as I request this, we should see that this is going to start producing some glass. So let's go ahead and make some glass, just like so. And we'll see that furnace kicks on and it's now feeding those required items in here. And it has built up a queue, but we can't actually see that queue right now. Now, to be able to see that queue, we are going to need ourselves a crafting monitor. And this is going to show us the processes that are actively being crafted. Now, another useful screen that you might want is going to be a crafting manager. This is going to allow you to see all of our crafters, and instead of going into a massive array of crafters and trying to hand place them in here, you can just place in your patterns directly through your crafting manager. Now, this is all well and functional, but manual. To be able to make this a little less manual, and let's for example say we wanted to keep an inventory constantly filled with glass. Well, we would have to manually craft all of this stuff, right? To keep it stocked? No, you can actually use an exporter here, and we can define our export to be glass. And so we would just put glass in here, but it's only going to send what it has just crafted. So all of the glass is now gone, but it is not continuing to request the craft. To be able to get it to request the craft until this barrel is filled, we can use a crafting upgrade. The crafting upgrade is fantastic. You place it in your exporter, and now this is going to constantly request glass to be crafted constantly until the inventory has been filled. And that is very, very nice. But what if you only wanted to keep, for example, a stack of glass in this inventory? Well, you could use some redstone control to do that. And I think one of the best ways to do this is to simply connect right up next to this a detector. And you can place this on top. It doesn't really matter. It is going to send a redstone signal to this. And let's say I wanted to make sure that I always kept at least a little bit of sand in here. So let's say I want to keep 32 sand and I want to shut this off otherwise. So we would put sand in here and we'd define our number as 32. So we can go ahead and over here and say emit a signal when above the amount, or we can say emit a signal when under the amount. For me, if I do under the amount, I want to make sure this is 33. And then when it goes down to 33, it'll be at 32 in the storage and it will stop. So This is going to emit a signal when it reaches that. And we just want to make sure that this is set to only work without a redstone signal. So this will work without a redstone signal, meaning that whenever this emits a signal, this will stop the request and will no longer try to send glass over here, thus making sure that we stay with at least 32 sand in here. And we can see this. If we do this, we take these out, you can see that is now emitting a signal, and this should now no longer be trying to send anything in here. Now, on the topic of upgrades, and in similar fashion to what we just set up here, we can actually use a regulator, which is going to allow us to limit the amount of items that gets exported into that inventory. So, for example, we can have an exporter here, and let's say we want this exporter to export leaves, but we only want it to ever put 2 leaves in this barrel at any given moment. To be able to do this, we would put a regulator upgrade in here, and then we would, for example, have ourselves 2 leaves, and we will specify, hey, 2 leaves, and this will only ever keep 2 leaves in this inventory. I think the regulator definitely goes very hidden in this mod, but is an insanely powerful tool if used correctly within some other mods. Now, there is one other thing that I do want to show off, and that is the fluid that you can mess with inside of refined storage. So over here, I have an infinite water source and a destructor. This destructor is set to fluid mode. So you have to set these to fluid mode. They do not work with items and fluid at the same time, unfortunately. So this is actually collecting fluids and it's storing it inside of a fluid storage disk. And we can actually see that fluid up here in the top left of our fluid grid. Now, you can move fluids around using the exporters and importers as well. So all you have to do is switch this to item mode, and then I should be able to set water, for example, to go in here. Now, I believe the regulator also works in this case. So if we went ahead and said, hey, send some water over here, I think we can do that by clicking a bucket. It should only fill this with that very specific amount of water. For example, 1 bucket you can see right here. And if I take the regulator out, it's just going to try and fill this entire thing with water. So yes, you can also utilize this for moving fluids around, and it is quite useful. So now, last but not least, we're going to talk about the disk manipulator. So this is a pretty interesting tool that definitely goes underused from what I've seen. And you can take, for example, a storage disk, and you can empty this storage disk by default. It'll start to take items out of this storage disk and insert them into the network. And this seems pretty cut and dry by default. And you can also pull, for example, items out of this storage disk right here and insert it into here. Now, it's all priority based, and like I said, it's pretty cut and dry, but what you might look over is the fact that you can use priorities to send it into a storage. So if you wanted to empty a disk, for example, into this barrel, you would use an external storage, much like this, and you would go ahead and set this to a higher priority. So once this higher priority is set, this is still considered part of the network. And so if this is set to insert into the network, this is now the network. And so it is going to take all the items out of this card and it's going to start flooding them into this barrel. Essentially, this right here is acting as an exporter that doesn't have to have a filter. And of course, to make this faster, it will take a stack upgrade and you can place speed upgrades in here. So this thing can become incredibly quick, very, very fast, like you see here. And then you can also reverse this. Let's say you have a bunch of items in a barrel right now, and you have this set on high priority. What you can go ahead and do is you can have all of these items here be inserted into this disk by just switching this mode. And so all of those items are now being quickly inserted into the storage disk from that barrel. And now, with all of that being said, I hope you have a better understanding of how refined storage works, and I hope you can use all of this information to improve on your automation systems when you start to play any mod pack that has this mod in it. And so with that, if you did enjoy today's video and you enjoy this style of video, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and click that subscribe button if you haven't already for more videos just like these. Now, of course, if anything was absolutely wrong, be sure to comment them down in the comment section below, and down there I will have some revised stuff in case I made a mistake during this video. And with that, I look forward to seeing you guys craft on. And as always, thanks for watching. Bye!